I think we can pray and go home. My son's baseball coach is here tonight, and Danny, I'm just saying, I think maybe that's some good stuff right there. I know that's ridiculous. You're like, okay, Wes, why in the world did we just watch that? There's something about that actually kind of gets me fired up. Like, I'm ready to go play some ball now, and I'm ready to go be a winner, not a loser. I'm ready to go be gooder. And I think there's a little bit of that in all of us. Like, we're all wired to, with this desire that we want to excel. We want to do well. We want to accomplish something in our lives. And I think that where I want us to look, we're going to land the plane tonight on this old school faith teaching collection we've been in. And next week, we're going to start something new for the next 3 weeks. But I want us to kind of have that mindset as we jump into a story and we think about this idea of being successful, winning, being excellent, accomplishing something. I think it would be a tragedy for us to, as Christ followers, to just think, I just need to go with the flow, and life's just going to kind of happen as it happens, and, I'll just kind of stay safe, I'll kind of stay polite, stay nice, and things will just kind of take care of themselves. But I think there's actually something really healthy and valuable in locking in and staying focused. What is it that I can do today so that I can guarantee that I'm successful in the things I want to be successful in? And so today, what I really want us to talk about is this idea of habits. Aristotle says this. He says, excellence is not an act, it's a habit. In other words, excellence is determined by repeated patterns of behavior in our lives. And so we're going to look at a story in Daniel chapter 6, and it's a story that if you've been to church at all in your life, and maybe even if you haven't ever been to church, you've probably heard the story about Daniel and the lion's den. And you've seen the picture of Daniel hanging out with these big cats in a pit, and it's something that's familiar. But as we look at this story, I think we're going to see something really, really significant that we can learn something from today, that we can put into practice today, and tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day. So I want you to turn to Daniel chapter 6. If you've got your Bible, you can turn there. You can turn to your app. One of the things I started doing a couple weeks ago, because I enjoy teaching from a TV, because I like to point out specific words. So my fear in doing that, and I've kind of wrestled with this tension, is if I start doing this, then will people start losing the value of bringing their own Bible to church? And I hope that doesn't happen. And so hopefully maybe this even helps you bring a copy so that you can mark it up. You can highlight the things you want to highlight as we're going through this passage. But Daniel chapter 6, let me catch us up in the story. Daniel, if you're familiar with the book of Daniel, you go back to the beginning, chapter 1. Daniel and several of his friends have been taken captive by the Babylonians. Daniel was from Jerusalem. He was a Jew, and the Babylonians took them out and took out most of their families. It was not a pretty scene. And they took the finest, the brightest, the best of the people in Jerusalem, and they took them captive to Babylon. Now, most likely, Daniel and his friends and many others like them were probably in their teenage years, so they were kind of the youth of Jerusalem, and they get there and the Babylonians begin to brainwash them. They begin to teach them their ways. They want to turn them into Babylonians. They want to submerge them in the culture so they can begin to live like Babylonians. You begin to kind of see the story. You see the story about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego as they're thrown into the fiery furnace, and that's all happening in the book of Daniel. So we land at Daniel chapter 6, but it's important for us to know a lot has transpired between chapter 1 and chapter 6, because Daniel was probably a teenager in chapter 1, and when we get to chapter 6, we know that Daniel is actually more like in his 80s, 90s. So we've seen decades pass. And so we're going to pick up in verse 1, Daniel chapter 6. Now, the Babylonians are the ones that took Daniel captive, but they were actually taken out just before where we pick up by the Persians and the Medes. And so there's a new ruler, and his name is Darius. He is taken over command. He is ruling the people in Babylon. And so it says this: it seemed good to Darius to appoint 120 satraps over the kingdom, that they would be in charge of the whole kingdom, and over them 3 commissioners, of whom Daniel was one, that these satraps might be accountable to them, and that the king might not suffer loss. Then this Daniel began distinguishing himself. In other words, he's standing out. There's something remarkable about Daniel's life among the commissioners and the satraps because he possessed an extraordinary spirit. And the king planned to appoint him over the entire kingdom. The title, you saw that as I skipped past it quickly to get to my verse because I forgot to say it, but really the title for today is Everyday Habits for Extraordinary Influence. Because every single one of us wants to live a life of influence. We want to be able to get to the end of our life and say, you know what, I made a difference. There was something significant in my life that impacted the people around me in a good way. And I think what we see immediately in this part of Daniel's story, and really throughout the entire book of Daniel, is you see Daniel, he is distinguishing himself among all the others. Now, he's not just distinguished among everyday people. He's a distinguished person among the elite, the commissioners and the satraps. Now, the satraps are this group of people that operate like a mayor or a governor. So Daniel's got this distinguishing personality about himself, this distinguishing life, and it's described as an extraordinary spirit, which is actually something that describes Daniel multiple times throughout the book of Daniel. And I told you that Daniel was older, probably between 90 years old. So we'll go right in the middle. We'll just say and assume Daniel was 85 years old. But yet he's still living a distinguished life with an extraordinary spirit. I think it's encouraging for us that there's never an end to our life of influence. As long as there's air in my lungs and I'm breathing on this planet, then God has a plan and a purpose for me. He has an influence he wants me to continue to live out in the people around me. Daniel's doing this all the way in his 80s. The first thing I think I want us to understand is simply this, is that public influence comes from private discipline. As we think about habits, we're going to understand what this means. Daniel's an influencer. He's influencing the people around him. And what we're about to find out is we're about to see some of the things that he does in private that I believe are cultivating this life of extraordinary influence. This extraordinary spirit that he lives with is coming from the private disciplines that he practices continually in his life. Harriet Beecher Stowe says, to be really great in little things, to be truly noble and heroic in the insipid details of everyday life, is a virtue so rare as to be worthy of canonization. In other words, what she's saying is find someone who's good at focusing on the small stuff, and that she would even consider that person to be a saint. There's integrity regardless of how significant or insignificant the things that someone is doing in their life. And she's saying, pay attention to someone who lives that way. And I think what we see in the book of Daniel is exactly this. Genuine success is never accidental. I told you last week, I don't play golf a lot. I played a few weeks ago, and I reminded myself why I don't play golf a lot, because it was terrible. But every now and then, I'll hit a good shot. And if you've played golf and you play bad like I play, then you've probably heard something like this. Well, I'd rather be lucky than good. I don't know why people tell me that. I think that's maybe just like their way of encouraging me to just kind of keep going. Like, hey, man, you're doing fine, but you know what? It's better to be lucky than good. Like, really? Is it? I mean, when I think about life, that's a terrible motto for life. Maybe it works for golf, or maybe it's just a pity statement for people that are terrible at golf. But legitimate success is never accidental, and I don't think that Daniel lived a life where he intended things just to happen. He practiced specific things. We're about to see what that is, but here's why this is important. And I think even for us as a church, as a group of people who are gathering together, not just to gather together so we can say we can check that off our weekly to-do list, but we're gathering together because we're living a life of purpose. I believe as Christ followers, if you have placed your faith in Jesus, then what God is calling us to do is He's calling us to live a life of influence, to pay attention to the spheres of influence that we find ourselves in, and we begin to take advantage of those relationships and the relational equity that we've built up and use that to influence people toward a specific something, that specific something being God. You see, I believe that Jesus followers should be the best employees in the workplace. They should be the best boss in the workplace. We should excel at the work that we do. There should never be this effort that we just kind of haphazardly live as a Christ follower. We're honoring God by the way that we work, by the way that we carry ourselves every single day, in the big and the small, in the significant and the insignificant. We meet deadlines. We meet expectations. We go above and beyond to carry out the responsibility that we've committed to. I believe it was this that Daniel did that set him apart. And so Daniel and these two other guys have been kind of commissioned, there's three of them, to lead for Darius. So Darius, this is his structure of leadership that he set up, And immediately, what we're seeing is we're about to see this opposition begin to take place. Listen, every single time, we talked about this a few weeks ago, every single time you begin to take significant steps to trust God and to do what God has called you to do, you can expect there to be opposition in your life. That's what we're about to see. It's what we see we'll pick up in verse 4. It says this: Then the commissioners and the satraps began trying to find a ground of accusation against Daniel in regard to government affairs. But they could find no ground of accusation or evidence of corruption, inasmuch as he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption was to be found in him. Think about what we're about to step into. I mean, it's really already kind of here. Next year is going to be an election year for the presidential office. I'm not ready for that. I don't know that we are. I think we're going to see a campaign and a political battle that we maybe have never seen before. And what we're going to see is exactly what we're seeing in the story. There's one group who wants to do everything they can to dig up any kind of dirt and expose anything that would show a lack of integrity, that would show an inability to operate as president of the United States. In this situation, we're talking about in order to operate as a commissioner of the satraps. And so this is what's going on. You see this opposition, but what we are seeing, what we're recognizing in the story right away is that they're not finding anything. They're struggling to recognize anything that they could maybe hold Daniel accountable to that might remove him from being in the power that he has. They're jealous. They're envious. Because what did we read? It said that Daniel was going to be appointed over the entire kingdom. Darius already had his eye on Daniel. Yeah, sure, he set up all three, but Daniel distinguished himself. So there's envy. And envy, left undealt with, always leads to hostility. I mean, think about it. I wrestle with this sometimes. I can get on social media and I can see something, and maybe there's somebody who receives something in their life, something really good happens to them, and I can immediately begin to go to this place in my mind, and I know this is disappointing for you to think about as your pastor, but like I can get to a place where I really think to myself, like, why them? Like, they don't deserve that. Why would something like that happen to them? Like, does God really know everything about them? Why is that? It really doesn't have anything to do with their relationship and God and knowing how much God knows about them. It really has everything to do with me. It exposes the condition of my heart. It exposes the envy and the comparison that we all can wrestle with. And we can create this opposition with the people around us. So listen, as you take those steps to trust God more, expect the opposition. Don't freak out when opposition shows up as you're following Jesus. In fact, I would even say the time when you need to freak out is when there's never any opposition because of your faith in Jesus. We should expect it. The story goes on. Daniel is strong. He's courageous. He's distinguished. The story goes on. It says, then these men said, we will not find any ground of accusation against Daniel unless we find it against him with regard to the law of his God. You see, they're recognizing there's something going on here. They've investigated this. They've sent the TMZ crews in with the cameras and the hidden interviews trying to find something on this guy, trying to expose him. Like, man, we can't find anything. Like, this guy is squeaky clean. And it continues on in verse 6. Then these commissioners and satraps came by agreement to the king and spoke to him as follows. King Darius, live forever. There's a little bit of brown nosing going on here. They're trying to schmooze King Darius. This is King Darius, live forever. All the commissioners of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps, the high officials and the governors have consulted together that the king should establish a statute and enforce an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, like, hey, just a reminder, Darius, O king, King Darius, like, they're trying to pump this guy up. They're like, Darius, like, man, have you been working out lately? Because you're looking good in that medium t-shirt that you got on. Like, what's your secret? Like, what supplements are you taking? Like, what's going on with you, Darius? Like, you're looking good, O king. You know that decision you made the other day, Darius? Like, that was genius. Nobody would have thought of that, but you did. Like, they're trying to pump him up. anyone who makes a petition to any god or any man besides you, O king, for 30 days shall be cast into the lion's den. Now, this government, this culture in this day, they had set it up where it was really kind of a system of accountability for those that were in charge, those who were ruling over the people. That if they put any kind of law or statute in place, then that could not be removed for 30 days. And so they're like pumping Darius up and say, hey, Darius, listen, all the important people consulted together. Did they really? I don't know. Was it just these two? I get the impression based on the story that it was really just these two, but they come to Darius and they say, hey, we consulted, we came up with this plan. Darius, really, there's not any other voice or any other leadership that anybody in this world needs except for yours. Like, you are it. And so if there's anyone that goes and consults with any other leader, ruler, God, anything, then listen, they need to be thrown in the lion's den. Well, Darius is flattered. He's excited. He's like, yeah, you know what? I think they're right. They found a weakness in Darius. It was his ego. And so they come up with this plan, and they basically have tricked Darius. Look what it says in verse 8. Now, O king, there it is again, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so it may not be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which may not be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document, that is, the injunction. So in this moment, the king has been tricked. He's been tricked by people that he trusted. He's been misled by people that he trusted. They've come up with a plan, and at this point, their plan is working. But then this might be the most money verse in the entire story. When we think about public influence coming from private discipline, look how Daniel responds. Now, when Daniel knew that the document was signed, so he knew everything. I mean, he was up at the same level of leadership that they were. So he knows what's about to happen. It says that he entered his house. Now in his roof chamber, he had windows open toward Jerusalem. Why is that significant? Because he's looking towards where he was from. He was from Jerusalem. It was really where his faith was rooted in Jerusalem. It's where he began to understand who God was, and it's where he began to practice some of the things that he's still practicing today. And he continued, kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. As he had been doing previously. He's looking to Jerusalem, and he begins to do what he's done for decades, praying 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks, praying and giving thanks, praying and giving thanks. You see this private discipline. If Daniel's in his 80s, and he was taken captive when he was a teenager, then for 60, 65, 70 years, Daniel has been practicing this habit in his life. He's been practicing this act every single day of praying and giving thanks. There it is. There's the habit that I believe has set Daniel up to have a life that's distinguished, a life with this extraordinary spirit. It's a consistent response. Like, he knows the consequences of being caught. He doesn't hide it. He goes up on the roof and he begins to pray. Why? Because intimacy with his heavenly Father is ultimate in his life. And nothing is going to keep him away from continuing to cultivate that relationship. And how has he done that? Prayer and thanks. Prayer and thanks over and over and over and over. And it begins to create this relationship that I think we all long for. And so I think that maybe an important thing for us to recognize is that if we haven't decided how we'll continue to know God, then we'll always miss out on actually knowing God. I mean, I think about this in marriage. I remember when I met my wife. I remember when I first saw my wife. She didn't see me. I saw her, though. And we were about to get on a charter bus. We were in a parking lot at a church in College Station. We were about to get on a charter bus and go skiing in Colorado over Christmas break while we were in college. And I remember seeing her, and then I remember listening to her when she was sitting just a couple rows behind me, and her laugh caught my attention. There was just something about her, and it was just kind of, it wasn't like this moment where I was like, I'm going to marry that girl one day. But she just caught my attention. So we got to know each other a little bit. I just strategically found myself in the same place as she was. I know it's kind of creepy, but it's whatever. I prayed about it. It's good. Got to know her, and we became friends, and we started studying together a lot while we were going to school, and eventually we started dating, and eventually got married. And listen, like the whole time, like through that process of getting to know her, I would just sit there and think sometimes like, wow, you're amazing. Like you're incredible. I remember we started dating, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is the woman of my dreams. And I really quickly was like, I think I want to spend the rest of my life with her. And then we get married, and I remember our wedding day. I was like, wow, you are amazing. You look amazing. Like this day is so much better than I ever could have imagined. As you know, we've been married almost 17 years, and there are still moments where I have that thought. Wow, you're amazing. Like, I think back just to the summer. My wife doesn't work in the summer because she works for the school district, and so just getting to spend some time together and have conversation and watching her interact with my two boys and navigate conversations with them as she listens to them much better than I could ever listen to them, and they would say yes and amen to that 10 times over. But I love my wife, and there's still things I'm continuing to learn about my wife. That's what intimacy is. Intimacy is to know and to be fully known. And our relationship with God is the same way. Marriage is supposed to be a picture for us to show us what a relationship with God looks like. And so it's not just this moment like a husband and wife standing on a stage on their wedding day saying, oh, we know and are known by each other, live happily ever after. It's this commitment to continue to know, to continue to get to know by spending time together. This is what Daniel does. He's cultivating this relationship. He's cultivating this intimacy. How does he do it? He has a plan. He has a rhythm. He has a routine that he's been practicing for decades. So what does that mean for us? It means that maybe we should make a plan. Charles McDonald says, "It occurred to me one day that my most important time allocations had something in common. They never screamed out immediately when ignored." Let me say that again. It occurred to me one day that my most important time allocations had something in common. They never screamed out immediately when ignored. Listen, if you begin to ignore your spiritual disciplines of prayer or journaling or even just going to church, it's not like God starts yelling at you. Like you can't sleep at night because God's like knocking on your roof saying, hey, wake up, what about me? You begin to ignore your family. And the intentional time with your family or with your spouse or with some of your closest friends, they don't immediately start yelling back at you. If you begin to do any of those things, you begin to neglect the things that are the most important, you might make it for a little while, but the end results will always be devastating. Benjamin Franklin says this: your net worth in life is determined by what's remaining after your bad habits are subtracted from your good habits. That's the net worth of your life. Did you know that 40% of your actions are not conscious decisions? 40%. That's almost half of your life that just happens. Those are the habits, the things you don't have to think about. You just go about your day, and those things just seem to happen. The patterns continue to just kind of repeat themselves over and over and over. I've talked about this before. There's this part of our brain called the basal ganglia, and it's the thing that keeps us at a place in our lives where we can function at the highest level because we're not having to concentrate on every little thing that we do all the time. Have you ever had a moment where you drove all the way home from work, and then you got there and you thought to yourself, did I stop at any of the red lights on the way home? Well, you probably did because your basal ganglia is working. You're not having to process that, so you're able to function at a higher level. Those are habits. Habits have been formed in our lives, and habits are powerful. Listen, if you fail to pay attention to your habits, your life won't be worth paying attention to. There's something important for us to see here. We see this in the life of Daniel. I've read a lot of books on this over the years. One of the books that I read is called Atomic Habits by James Clear. If you are looking for a good read, I would encourage you to read it. But he says this in his book. He said, habits are a double-edged sword. They can work for you or they can work against you, which is why understanding the details is essential. Another book I read is called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. Keystone habits are simply this. Keystone habits start a process that over time transform everything else. So the things that we intentionally decide to begin to do, and as we do those things, other things in our lives begin to kind of fall into a specific place, in a specific pattern. And so maybe the process is paying attention to some of those keystone habits. Some of the keystone habits he talks about is, one, making your bed in the morning. I'm not going to make you raise your hand, but I wonder how many of us make our beds in the morning. I had a father growing up that it wasn't a choice if you were going to make your bed or not. You made your bed. Like, you had to make your bed. And so I still today, every day, I wake up and it's part of my rhythm. It's part of my routine. I make the bed. He calls that a keystone habit. And he says this. He says, making your bed every morning is correlated for people to be more productive, to have a greater sense of well-being, and stronger skills at sticking to a budget. Some of you right now, you're like, okay, tomorrow I'm making my bed. Tuesday, I'm making my bed. Wednesday, I'm making my bed. Maybe it's not making your bed. You're like, man, I don't want to make my bed. I've never made my bed. I'm not going to start making my bed today. Listen, I'm not saying you have to make your bed. He's just, through research, that's what he's determined. He also said this, family dinners. Maybe this could be a keystone habit. Family dinners. Studies have documented that families who habitually eat dinner together throughout the week seem to raise children, check this out, with better homework skills, higher grades, greater emotional control, and more confidence. I'd say that's a decent keystone habit. Here's another one, maybe everybody's favorite, exercise. People who habitually exercise have a tendency to, check this out, eat healthier, smoke less, more productive at work, show more patience with colleagues and family. Some of you just elbowed your spouse and said, hey, you need to start working out because that patience is getting thin. They feel less stress, and they use credit cards less frequently. That's a keystone habit. There's research that backs this up. It's fascinating to me. Paying attention to the things that we do. The University of Rhode Island had a study that said this, exercise spills over, and there's something about it that makes other habits easier. Here's why I think that's significant. Specifically when it comes to exercise, just a little side note. Maybe there's something to exercise for us as Jesus followers. And listen, I'm not saying this to shame anyone. Listen, I haven't like specifically tried to exercise in probably a month, okay? So I'm not judging you. But what if there's something to exercise that maybe we should be paying more attention to because we've been given a call on our lives as a follower of Jesus to carry out a purpose and a mission that's more significant than anything else in this world. So if this is true about exercise, maybe there's something there that we need to be paying attention to because we've been given an assignment. And it's not an assignment from our boss at work, it's an assignment from our Heavenly Father who's existed before time ever started. One of the things that I do, probably a keystone habit for me, is I wake up early. I'm a creature of habit. I like to wake up early, and so summertime kind of messes me up because my kids are home from school, my wife is home from school, and so they all stay up super late and want to get up super late, and so it just throws me off. And right now we're kind of starting to transition back into the school routine, and so I like to get up early. I do some of my best work in the mornings. It's just how I'm wired. And listen, if you're not, I know this for a fact, some of you don't need to wake up early. For the sake of everybody else in the world's a better place if you just go ahead and sleep in. That's how you're wired, and that's okay. I wish I was wired that way. I can sleep in late, but when I sleep in late, I've wasted my day. Because if I can wake up early in the morning, I can get started on my day. For the first 3 or 4 hours that I'm awake, I can get my best work done. That's when I'm the most focused. It's when I have the best attention. It's when I get my deepest, most important work of the day done. It's what I need to do. It's what I need to do to be successful. Winston Churchill, did you know this, was notorious in World War II for taking a nap every single day. If Winston Churchill did it and it worked for him, then Wes Jackson can do it and it can work for me. I like naps. But here's why he did that. He knew that he was sharpest right after he had woken up. And so he said, you know what? I decided I needed to have 2 mornings every day because he'd get the best work done in the first 2 or 3 hours after he woke up. And so while the Germans are trying to take over the world, Winston Churchill is taking a nap. But it's what made it work for him. It's what helped him live a life that was distinguished. So what maybe are the keystone habits? For Daniel, if we go back to the story of Daniel, Daniel had a keystone habit. It was prayer and praise. Prayer and praise. Jesus did this. Daniel's doing this. So what habit maybe should you include this week? Maybe it's just simply that. It's prayer and praise. Sit down and just begin to thank God for all that he's given you, for all that he's done in your life. And you might sit there and think it's easy for us to get to this place where we always want to go negative first. It's easy to think, well, I don't know what God's done for me. I don't know that I have anything to be thankful for. I think it's important for us to realize like where we are. Suburban Houston. There's a lot that we do have in suburban Houston that people all across the world would give anything to have. So just begin to think that way and begin to put our minds there and begin to write some of those things down and then begin to pray about the things that you want to see God do in your life. I'm a big proponent of journaling. That's just something I've done for really my whole life, and I encourage you to do that because here's what happens. Oftentimes, I'll go back and I'll start reading in my journal 6, 7, 8, 9 months ago, a couple of years ago, and I'll begin to read some of the prayers that I prayed to God in times of desperation, in times of just real dysfunction in my own personal life. And sometimes I forget even some of the prayers that I used to pray that God answered so faithfully, and it sends me into this place of gratitude. Listen, some of the greatest people in the world are people who live with gratitude. Daniel practiced this. And what was the result of it? Well, they run in, and they find him praying, and they take him captive. And they go and they tell King Darius, Daniel broke the law. Daniel did exactly what you said, O King Darius, no one could do. I mean, they're pumped. They're ecstatic. They're excited about what has happened. But Darius, not so excited. And so if we skip down to verse 16, look what happens, because it has to happen this way. Then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. Isn't that a fascinating story? Isn't that a fascinating verse? Even Darius, you sense by Darius' response is that he's even a little bit disappointed. He recognizes he's been tricked, but he also recognizes the God that Daniel prays to. He says, the God that you serve will deliver you. So Darius does what Darius has to do, and he sends Daniel to the lion's den. And it's interesting, as you read the rest of the story, the only person who has a good night that night is Daniel in the lion's den. Which, by the way, I know I kind of give cat lovers a lot of grief, but can we just pause right here? Darius could have done anything to bring punishment and take someone's life in this moment. And what did he choose as his method of torture? To throw them in a pit of cats. That's the inspired word of God, all right? I'm just saying. That's not Wes's words. I'm just kidding. We sing songs about Jesus coming like a roaring lion, so listen, I get it. Throw the cat lovers a bone. But can we just see what's going on here? Daniel is in the lion's den with hungry lions. But if you look at everybody else in the story, you go back and read this. If you have time this week, I encourage you to go back and read this. Nobody else is having a night of peace. King Darius is miserable. He's not doing anything. He's got insomnia. He's overwhelmed with grief of what's happened to Daniel. He can't believe that he's been duped. His accusers, they're celebrating. They're partying. They're living it up that night. His friends, they're worried. They're praying. They're probably trying to just figure out, God, why did you let this happen? Daniel, what's he doing? Well, he's chilling with the lions. Darius wakes up the next morning, goes to check on him. He's like, Daniel, are you there? You okay? You awake? And Daniel's just like, yeah, man, I'm just hanging out. Like just hanging out with Aslan and Leo and reading them a book. Like he's living at peace. Why? Well, look what verse 23 says. It says, then the king was very glad and gave orders for Daniel to be lifted up out of the den. So Daniel was lifted up out of the den, and no injury whatsoever was found on him because he had trusted his God. Where did Daniel's peace come from in this situation? It came from his trust in God. But if you go on and read the story, Daniel is rescued. His accusers are tossed in. And the story reads on, and it says that as his accusers are thrown into the pit, the lions devoured them and crushed their bones before they even hit the ground. These were hungry lions that God rescued Daniel from. Daniel was living in the midst of lions desiring to take his life, and he was living in that moment with peace. I don't know that we fully understand what's going on here. But look at what's even more fascinating. Look at Darius' response. Look what Darius does when he sees this. Verse 25, then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in all the land, may your peace abound. May your peace abound. what just happened here? This story started off with a prohibition against prayer. It ends with the one who signed the prohibition against prayer into place, going and declaring to all people about this God that Daniel trusts. So he goes from putting a prohibition to prayer to going and declaring God's goodness to all people. This is a remarkable story. How does this happen? Why did it happen? It happened because Daniel was consistent. He was committed. He had been practicing this for decades. What does that mean for us? Simply this. Peace under pressure comes from consistency when it's peaceful. Every single one of us. We want to live a life where we experience legitimate peace, real peace. I'm not a rocket scientist. I'm not the smartest person in the room by any stretch of the imagination. But I do know this, and I think this is what I learned from this story, and I've learned just from living life, and I think we can all agree with this, that if I wait until the final hour of difficulty to decide to do something that I know is right, then I'll fail every single time. Daniel had been consistently practicing this rhythm. You want to know what you're going to do or what you're going to run to when you're pressed with something really overwhelming? You want to know what you're going to do when there's a confrontation that's about to take place with somebody that you care about, that you know has to take place, that has to be confronted? You want to know what you're going to do when you face a situation like Daniel faced, where your faith is going to be challenged and the results could be something detrimental to you? You want to know what you're going to do? You want to have the courage to do the right thing? Then we must pay attention to what we're doing right now. Failure to pay attention to it right now leads us to a devastating place when the pressure mounts. Choose your habits, change your life. It's not enough for us to live lethargic in the things that we do. It's not enough for us just to dismiss things and think, well, I'll have more time, or I'll have a better chance. Things will fall into place at another time. Choose your habits today. Begin to change your life today. I think the biggest tragedy that we would make tonight is that we would look at Daniel's story and just simply say, I want to be like Daniel. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But I think we would miss maybe what's most important. His life was a life of greatness, but it's not the main point of the story. We begin to think about Daniel's life as like the lives of so many in the Old Testament we've looked at over the last few weeks. It's always pointing us to Jesus. If we just try to copy Daniel, mimic his actions, then we're going to still find ourselves in a place of disappointment and regret. Daniel did too. The point is to point us to Jesus. There's so many parallels between Daniel's story and Jesus' story. They're both a picture of innocence. You look at Daniel's life, there's not a lot in his life as you read through the book of Daniel that you look at and you think, man, I can't believe Daniel did that. It was kind of this picture of a saint. Look at the life of Jesus. He was perfect. He never sinned. They both had jealous political leaders that were trying to scheme and work against them, made up false accusations, came up with plots to kill them. Both were declared innocent by a primary judge. Daniel with Darius, Jesus with Pilate. They were declared innocent, but yet still had to suffer the consequences. Both were thrown into a pit or a cave with a stone that was rolled across that. Both of them were left for dead but walked out of that tomb. But there's a huge difference. Daniel eventually died. Jesus eventually died, but he overcame death, and he beat death, and he walked out of that tomb alive. This is more than just a kid's story or a lesson on choosing our habits. Psalm 22 says, on the cross, Jesus was thrown to the lions of judgment, which circled him, taunted him, and then tore him apart. Jesus, innocent, was killed. Sally Lloyd-Jones says, I'll read this to you. It says, Jesus was left in the blackness utterly alone and abandoned by God, suffering the fate that we, the guilty ones, deserved. God did not shut the mouths of Jesus' lions like he did Daniel's. He let them tear him apart. His body was left entombed in the ice grip of death for 3 days before the angel finally came to roll away his stone. Jesus chose this for us. That's where he and Daniel are different. When Daniel came forth from the lion's den, he came out alone, and no one else was saved by God's deliverance of him. But when Jesus came forth from the tomb, he came out as a head of a mighty company of people who have been redeemed from the pit through his death. Because of the work of Christ on behalf of his people, the divine judge says, "Not guilty, you may go free." I thank God for the example of Daniel, but I worship Jesus for what he did in my place because I wasn't capable of doing it by myself. I'll close with this. I know that life is crazy. I know that many of us are tired and overwhelmed, but let me just propose something to you. Let me just say that this bag has $1 million in it. I just got some of y'all's attention for the first time. $1 million. And let me just say, I'm going to give this away to the first person who can make it to the stage and take this bag from me. And you're like, Wes, you going to fight me for it? No, I'm not. I'm not a fighter. I'm just going to give it up because I don't like losing. Let's just say I set that right there. $1 million up for grabs. The first person who can come and take this from me. I've got a friend, I think, sitting right down here with a hat on, Tyler. Listen, Tyler, I haven't known Tyler a long time. He didn't know I was going to do this, and he's probably, his palms are getting a little sweaty right now. Here's what I know about Tyler. Tyler's a pretty respectful guy. Probably raised in the South. Probably the guy that still opens doors for ladies. Hannah, if that's wrong, don't tell us. Still respects his elders. Like Tyler, in the little bit of time that I've known Tyler, I just believe Tyler's a legitimately, genuinely nice guy. Like, cares about other people. I'm not going to make any assumptions about anybody's age, but Ed's sitting up here. And I'm just thinking you might be a little bit older than Tyler. I don't know that for sure. Ed's a great guy. But listen, as much as Tyler respects his elders, if you get up to come get this bag of $1 million, and he's on his way to come get this bag of $1 million, he's going to do whatever he can to take you out. Now, that's a tall task, because Ed's a big, strong dude. But he's going to do something. He's going to do something to try to forearm shiver, trip you up, I don't know, and you're going to fall down, and when you fall down, you think, well, he's a respectful guy, he'll help me back up. No, he's just going to put his foot right in the middle of your back and step over you to get up here on the stage. But then he's going to see Jamie right here, Jamie Brunskill, nice lady. She's going to get up to come get the money, because who doesn't want the money? And you're like, well, Tyler wouldn't do anything. Oh, shoot. He's going to swipe the leg. She's going to fall and hit her head, and then he's going to put his other foot in the middle of her back as he jumps up on the stage to get this bag. Why? Why would a man who is a genuinely good, respectable, honorable man do so much to get this money? Because he recognizes what's in the bag, and he understands the implications on his life and the difference that can be made in his life with the $1 million. And so why would a man so nice do that? Because he knows what's at stake. He understands the difference that it can make in his life. The reason I say that, and I'll land with this, is I think that as a Christ follower, it's the same thing. When we recognize what's at stake, the peace that we could experience in our lives, no matter where we find ourselves, the peace that's available is life-changing. And when we recognize that, then we take aside all fatigue, all lethargic thought, all apathy, everything, bad habits go to the side, because we see what's at stake and we see what's available. And so we begin to form our life around that, no matter what. On Christ, the solid rock, I stand. Listen, this is worth so much more than $1 million. To trust Jesus and experience the life that he has and the peace that comes with that. So would we trust Jesus? Would we worship Jesus? Would we pray to Jesus? Would we praise Jesus with everything? Would we build our habits around that so that we would experience his peace? Let's pray.